Waheguru Ji ki Fateh. Thank you, everybody, for joining me again today. We have a very special episode or space or live stream today, wherein we will have among us Sardar Amandeep Singh, whom you have already listened to multiple times with me, and along with him, we'll have ex CSIS officer Dan Stanton. He is a veteran of CSIS and I would say an expert on Sikh issues within Canada as well as within India. And so we have the honor of having him here today as well for a talk. Uh, so as we will get them in couple of seconds, but while we are doing that, I just want to make sure that everybody on the Twitter space can listen to my voice, and I will request people who have joined to go ahead and please retweet this space, um, and so that more people can join. You guys can also post it on your timeline. We are live right now on two places. We have a Twitter space which is on. We also have a live stream, Twitter live stream, which is on. So people can join in the space. They can also join, watch us on the live stream if you have to. In the live stream, you'll be able to actually see Dan himself. So without further ado, let me add, Dan to the stage. Hello, Dan. How are you doing?
Oh, great, Rajit. It's great to be here.
Yeah, great to have you. And Sat Sri Akal, Amandeep Paji. Welcome back. How are you doing?
Sat Sri Akal ji. Thank you, Dan, for joining as well. We're excited to have
Pleasure.
you.
Yeah. I know I'll just used to start off the space, but I just want to let my audience, because many of them tend to be new listeners as well from India and Canada both. Just let me give you a quick introduction. I basically started telling about Dan. Dan is a veteran from CSIS, and I believe he has 35 years plus in the intelligence service. And has also been in India and has served in multiple other countries and is now retired and living on the east coast of Canada. And with recent happenings, he has been actively, involved in social media, talking about these issues, and you probably have seen him on many television channels as well. So, Dan, do you want to add something else, like what all you have been doing? And I think people will be really interested in knowing a bit more about you.
Certainly, Harjeet, and thank you. Yeah, you're quite accurate. I did work 32 years with CSIS, and then I did a few contract years with Communication Security Establishment, which is the the SIGINT agency. Just for clarification for people, when I joined CSIS, it was fairly new, and what happened in Canada was in the 70s and into the early 80s. Just because of certain intelligence, I guess you could say, shortcomings, legal, legislative, the decision was made to have a civilian intelligence agency, that it was believed that civilians could do a better job in national security collection than in police officers. So I was very fortunate. I was selling shoes in Toronto, and I got hired into the first class, and then I worked through there, and yes, I am retired. I teach a national security program at the University of Ottawa. It's professional development in workshops, and as you alluded to, I also do some commentaries in the media from time to time.
Oh, no, great. Thank you for telling a bit more about yourself. I think I was not aware about that, and thank you. And with that, Amandeep Paji, can you talk a bit more about yourself as well? I'm sure many new listeners will be interested in knowing you a bit more.
No, I mean, this is about Dan's conversation, more or less. We've already been in conversation with most of you. I'm a sixth student of philosophy and anthropology and avid participant in community activity. I dabble in, current affairs and critical theory from Sikh liberation perspective, and we're happy to have this conversation. I think it's very timely. So thanks for putting it together. Thank you for your time again, Dan.
Yeah,
Got it. We are having a bit of issues, I think, with your voice, Amandeep Paji. Not sure why that is the case, but we'll see if that It's not like we can't hear you at all. It's just a bit of a muffling in between, but that's fine.
What
Uh,
did you join?
yeah, okay. Um, Amandeep Paji is going to rejoin back. Let's give him a couple of seconds. While he rejoins, maybe we can just talk a bit about the topic. This topic, when Amandeep Paji actually approached me last week, we've been talking about this issue multiple times on our spaces. But the topic kind of he gave, I think, kind of sums up this situation very well. The topic is transnational terror, the future of liberal democracy, and Hindutva. I think it kind of covers all the major, bases that have gotten highlighted in recent, I would say, 2 years, since the time when Justin Trudeau stood up in the Canadian Parliament and announced to the whole world that a Canadian Sikh has been murdered by a foreign government on Canadian soil. That caused, a number of sequence of events which came after that. um, Notably, one of them, I think biggest one, was a foreign interference inquiry which happened, and there have been some reports which came out of the foreign interference inquiry. And after that, the one which I find very shocking, or very revealing, was the RCMP commissioner from Ottawa doing a press conference, I think 3 years back. That was another landmark event where
Mhm.
you had the RCMP commissioner first time in a press conference laying out very, very serious charges against how Indian consulates are involved in criminal activities on Canadian soil. So, Dan, when you heard that press conference
Yep.
from RCMP commissioner himself, what was your reaction to it?
Well, I was quite surprised. I know the day well. It was our Thanksgiving, and I was actually working on the turkey and all that. And this came over the news, and I watched it. And as I'm sure it's the same in the United States, when law enforcement has ongoing criminal investigations that are going to be prosecuted in court, they don't have press conferences and reveal as much as they revealed there. So you're right, it was completely unprecedented. We do know why it was done. It was done because the activity was continuing in Canada and they needed to have it stop. But yeah, I, like a lot of Canadians, was surprised.
Yeah. Was it, in terms of the surprise element, right? What was the most surprising thing within that whole conference? Like, is it the naming of consulates themselves? Because that was unprecedented.
It is. And you see, most of my career was in what we call counterintelligence. So I was dealing with, we were dealing with a lot of state actors and hostile intelligence services. And historically, they don't use criminals. And historically, they just use intelligence officers. They don't use real diplomats. And so what we were learning there was it wasn't just, Indian intelligence that was involved. It was also some diplomats, including the ambassador. And this is new. This is really, I'd say, from a Western perspective, a newer kind of twist to that intelligence threat, that counterintelligence threat. And at the same time, we're hearing about these serial crimes, extortion, arson, blackmail, murder, being perpetrated by the representatives of a foreign state. And that information is there. And then, of course, the 6 diplomats were given the boot. So this is totally new. This is clearly unprecedented and somewhat shocking.
Yeah. On that, just before that conference, and maybe a couple of months before that, we had this, landmark event, which was the foreign interference report, which came out. And I know we saw some of your videos giving testimony there.
Yeah.
How how big of an issue is foreign interference from a security standpoint? Like, how serious of a threat it is to Canada and to United States in your view?
Yeah. Well, see, the inquiry looked at what we call political foreign interference and election meddling. That's really what it was about. It started with China and allegations they were, giving the Liberal Party an advantage in the elections, which it seems they were. And it wasn't looking at what we call transnational repression. It would be impossible. It would take years, and they also didn't have the background to investigate it. So they stayed focused on election interference, even though they had a panel in December talking about what was going on in diaspora communities, including the Sikh community in Canada. But then they went back to the interference in the elections. And one of the surprises for a lot of Canadians, while it was rolling away on China, in January, the commissioner of the inquiry said it's China, India, and other states. And what we found through the inquiry and also through media before that, some media leaks, is that the Indian government had been interfering in the political realm, and particularly with respect to a leadership in the Conservative Party and stuff going on in ridings in the Toronto area as well as in Vancouver. So what emerged early this year was that India had been interfering, not just in the Sikh diaspora, we knew that, but that they were actually interfering like China was in our political domain. Then, separate to the inquiry, we learn about all these criminal activities committed by largely Indian intelligence in Canada. So it really was eye-opening, I think, for Canadians. And we realized as a state, as a country, we have a serious problem with transnational repression. Iran, Russia, China, and now India and other countries as well. Turkey, there's been a number of them mentioned. So it's really kind of out of hand.
Yeah. To me, it almost seems like transnational terrorism now, because the state is kind of going ahead and killing, citizens.
Yeah, I mean, calling it foreign interference even is kind of, I find inappropriate. A lot of Canadians call everything foreign interference, but it is really, whether you want to call it extrajudicial killings or state terrorism. If it was Iran, we'd call it state terrorism. Canadians aren't used to that. We tend to think nobody's going to do that stuff in Canada, because we just have this naive idea, I think, that we're not impacted by what goes on around the world, but we clearly are.
Yeah. No, I think you kind of touch on a very valid point, that it was so difficult, it seems, to get a foreign inquiry interference committee to name India. Or I think there was some work done by Jagmeet Singh and some other politicians to even get it kind of constituted.
Yeah.
And then it was, even when the name came in, it remained restricted to the political domain. And then why? And then, like you pointed out, that if the same actions that India did were being done by somebody like Iran, there would have been a furor, and we would have not hesitated at all to call it state terrorism. Or
Yeah.
let us say a Muslim country was probably attacking Jews here, it would have been called by name what it actually is. But it has been so difficult to kind of, even get India named in the Foreign Interference Committee to start off with.
Yeah.
And then why do you think that happens? Like, what is the root cause for that kind of a soft handling of India?
Well, I suspect it's the same in Canada as is in the United States. I mean, India is regarded as, it's a member of the G20. It's a major trading partner. It's an alliance. From a Canadian perspective, it's, Commonwealth. We all came from, the British monarchy in a certain sense. And so it's always been in a different category. We hear words like friend. We hear words like ally. We hear like, alliance, whereas with Iran and Russia and North Korea and all those other pariah states, they've always been in that category. And so even when the Prime Minister made the announcement a year ago in September in the House about Mr. Najjar and India, there were Canadians in leadership positions who were like, well, wait a minute, this is India. We should talk to them. This is not the way to handle it. This isn't proper. This isn't, and that type of dialogue wouldn't happen when we learned that Iran tried to kill a Canadian in Montreal. Mr. Irvin Kotler is his name. He's a human rights advocate. Or if it was like the Russians. I have a bit of a background with Russian intelligence. And as you know, they do tend to kill people, defectors and dissenters alike. So yeah, I think it's the fact that India has been in that league or club of reasonable partners. And it's a surprise. And a lot of people have a hard time with that.
Do you think is there now a realization that maybe India need not be in that league? Maybe we are dealing with something different. And is that realization now there are in security establishment, and is that levels of realization different in the political establishment and security establishment?
It would be clear in the security and intelligence establishment. It would have been for some time, and now it would, because they would treat Indian intelligence as a hostile services. That would be the case when they are collecting intelligence on them involving state murder. I mean, there's no even imagining any alliance or cooperation. I don't know where this is going to go in the future in terms of the relationship, because as you know, Canada's not a big power. I wouldn't even say Canada's a middle power anymore. And Canada doesn't have a lot to bring to the table or to leverage the way, for example, the United States does. And while I think Canada's still still holding their ground in terms of wanting to prosecute people responsible and hold India to account, I'm sure with time, the relationship will go back, it'll never go back. It can't go back. But I'm sure there will be parties interested in getting it back on the table. But I think the condition would be that India has to cooperate. And India cannot keep denying and playing games and saying we don't see evidence when it's clear. We've heard it in the media, the government at various levels, the RCMP, the National Security Intelligence Advisor, CSIS, highest level of foreign affairs. They've all made representations to India with the evidence. And so this talk to the hand approach, it can't continue.
Yeah. No, I was kind of joking with somebody that, if the same act was done by even Great Britain on Canadian soil, our reaction would have been much harsher.
Yeah.
Let's say Australia did that in Canada. I don't think it would have been just, the remote possibility, not very long ago, we were fighting each other. And so the history is there. But
Yes.
the fact is, like, the reaction has been so muted. And that's where, Amandeep, I was always surprised, like, how is India able to blunt this, kind of the Western establishment, maybe in the Canadian establishment, had too much of a shock now. They can't overlook it. But how have they been able to blunt the reaction from the Western countries to acts which were clearly cross-national terror?
Well, I think what's hard for India is the fact that this is Canada doing this. Okay, Canada has a certain reputation. And so the idea that Canada would just pick a fight with India and make up all sorts of wild stories, I don't think there's a lot of people in the world, reasonable people, well-informed people that would think that's true. Interesting, yesterday evening, I was at a function at the House of Commons. I was invited by the Sikh Federation. We had Mr. Jaspal Singh Manohar, who's there from Punjab. He was speaking about the situation in Punjab. And he made an interesting comment. He said the Sikhs in India were really surprised and really impressed that Canada stood up to India. They thought, wow, this is unheard of. Because, of course, living in India, they're used to the fact that, you just get bullied. And a lot of other states just take that bullying. But again, I think I don't want to oversell Canada, but I think with Canada's reputation, it's not like Canada does this. We don't just make false accusations. That was a real sea change to kick out those diplomats. And of course, there were over 40 Canadian diplomats kicked out. So that's not something that was taken lightly. Right? There was a lot of strategy there. But what happened, we know from the media, is the Canadian government was so frustrated at being ignored in these accusations, and there were meetings canceled. I don't know, you probably heard about that. Mounties, the RCMP was going to Delhi, and then they were playing games about we didn't have an agenda, so we canceled the meeting. And so the frustration, I guess, was reaching a point, and at the same time, more Canadians were at risk. That's why the RCMP did the press conference. But I think there's also a lot of frustration in there from the government of Canada with respect to India.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
by the
no,
way, if you want to pitch in on that question, like I'm always surprised why such a kid glove handling for India.
yeah, no, I think that's one of the pressing questions for the Sikh community since day one. That how can a state enact such a spectacular violence, both in specific incidents like 1984, but also long-term, enduring, sustained, regular violence, and how do they get away with it so regularly? And I think one of the key, and I'd love to get your input on this, Dan, as well. I think one of the key sort of epistemological issues that we're facing as a community is that there is no name, no language, no grammar available in the global civil society to name this sort of violence. They know about political violence, they know about state versus minority violence, but the type of violence that is specific to the nation state of India, which is primarily a Hindu nation state with a Brahmanical sort of core, and it's a very unique type of violence because it's not just political, it's not just economic. It has dishonor built right into it. It has domination and degradation built right into it. So every time there's a conflict, they attack the most sacred sites, the most sacred relations, your family, your women, your mothers and daughters. Just like we saw in Brampton, there's mobs attacking families on the streets and facing the Gurdwara spiritual, centers of spiritual sacred sites. So how does it get away with it, and what is the sort of mechanics or the hydraulics in play? And I think that one of the key issues is that unlike anti-Semitism, unlike anti-blackness, unlike Islamophobia even, there is no receptacle or like a category that names this type of violence, right?
Yeah.
Because that's missing, it gets reduced to whatever political actor is involved at the time. It was 84 was about Indira Gandhi. Gujarat violence against Muslims was about Gujarati Muslims and Modi, and so it all gets sort of reduced to its particulars, and there's no connecting of the dots and creating of like a category of violence for it to be recognized. So it all that's one of the I think key things that's missing, and I'd love to get your understanding on that. Like, what's the temperament because I see in a global civil society, just to kind of flesh this a little bit, there's the Canadian state response, and then there's a Canadian civil society response. And there seems to be a big disconnect in that the civil society is almost, at least the right side of it, is half ignoring or giving a kid pass or letting it slide, whereas the state is a lot more clear. But the civil society doesn't have a deep enough memory or that language or grammar to understand this type of violence. And they also think it's happening over there, a couple of brown communities fighting over there. But I would love to understand, your thoughts on the hydraulics and like the mechanics behind this. Like, how do they make themselves so invisible?
That's a really good insight and really good question. And the question you pose is part of the reason for my advocacy, is because after the Prime Minister made the announcement, there was no outrage. The House of Commons was quiet. You could hear a pin drop. And then it wasn't long after, all due respect to the leader of the opposition, said, "Where's the evidence?" If you talk about China interfering in a nomination riding in Northern Toronto, people were outraged because, of course, it made the Liberal government look bad, China. But a foreign state has murdered a Canadian, it's a homeland issue. Go back there, sort it out. We don't need this over here. Well, we're talking about Canadians. So that's actually what prompted me. It was that passivity in the civil society. I'm not saying everyone had to get out on the street and get all excited about it, but the fact that Canadians were so outraged about interference in an election where everyone agreed it didn't alter the results of the election, where was the outrage with this? And then that's why I did a lot of interviews. It was like, come on, what did they give? Now, but I'll go back to what you brought up earlier, and I think it's a really interesting point when you say there is no label, there is no category to put this in. The Indian state was doing more than just killing Sikhs and trying to kill Sikhs. They also created the impression that Canada was being overrun by criminals and gangs. And this is part of the propaganda. And I remember it was last year even, and even in the early this year in the winter, we're hearing about all these arrests and gangs and arsons and extortions, all described as a South Asian community. But see, what they were doing, we know now, is it wasn't good enough to say Canada's overrun by terrorists and the prime minister takes cocaine and you're going to say, and also Canadians are so weak, they don't even deal with criminals. So they were creating that backdrop that Canada's being overrun by criminals as well as terrorists. And that's what's unheard of. I'm not talking about just an intelligence service. Intelligence service was involved, but also even their diplomats. Like, these people will never be posted anywhere again. They've been completely discredited. Those in their Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I think it was a strategy. I think it was also consistent, or I should say, in parallel to disinformation and propaganda. But you tell me, I can't figure out what we label it as.
Yeah, no, I mean, we have been dealing with it for 500 years. So we think it has, very, very unique form of racial supremacy, sacralized into metaphysics, into a nation state that's handed to them by this, colonial entity. The British imperialists left them. Yeah. And it's this monstrous, mutant thing of modern nation state, spiritualized fascism, and a very robust, aggressive political base that's willing to go to the extra length. And this is what's insane, is that, like you said, that they intensified their violence after Trudeau made the announcement.
Yeah.
So all of the extortions that happened, I mean, there's completely secular, non-related people getting attacked, like Punjabi singers who normally sang about nothing to do with any sort of resistance. Their houses were getting shot at, Sikh businessmen getting extorted. So there's a ritualistic dimension to this violence. This is not normal political tit for tat or some international relations, not following a certain type of protocol. There's something personal and ritualistic. With the targeted Nijjar at the Gurdwara Sahib. There's no need to do that, right? Yeah. To jeopardize their global image, their trade relations, all of that for what? Is really to dominate and dishonor the other. And I think that's the caste system. And there's no language, there's no receptacle in the civil society to really put this type of violence into. You can do it with anti-Semitism, you can do it with anti-Blackness, Islamophobia, but the work hasn't been done, right, to create that category for this. But I'm curious to understand your vast experience in this domain. You've seen lots of foreign interference instances and processes. So where does this stand in relation to your purview of China and others, and how do we rate this?
Yeah, it is part of a trend with what we call pariah states. So for example, like I said, I have a lot of experience with intelligence services, hostile, friendly, you name it. And generally speaking, they don't deal with criminals. Okay, you don't use criminals as sources of information because they're unreliable, they're indiscreet, they usually get caught, they're not that smart, and they're a lightning rod for law enforcement. So it doesn't matter whether we're talking about Russians, Chinese, Soviets. I did a few years in the Soviet target when I joined. But what we're finding is now I'm retired, but what's evolving is this nexus between security intelligence agencies, hostile ones, and engaging criminals. So I'll give you an example.
Mm-hmm.
The IRGC and the MOS, Ministry of Intelligence Security in Iran, has been involved in various odious crimes, trying to kill people in the United States and now recently in Canada. And there was a fellow in the United States called Shakeri. He was an Iranian American. He was in jail. He got let out, deported to Iran, and he used his connections in New York State, criminal, to kill dissidents, Iranian dissidents, and they even used the Hell's Angels from Canada to kill on one. And so what we're finding is the Iranians and the Russians, and I could be here all night talking about the Russians doing this. They've been engaging criminal elements, and this is part of the reason they get caught, to kill people, to put people under surveillance, to target them, to harass them, and to kill them, which is what India's been doing with the Bolshoi gang and everything else you've all heard about. Get the information in Canada. They're collecting it through their consulates and embassies, relaying it back to the gangsters in India, who then they're contracting it out to criminals in Canada. So it looks like it's all just a criminal thing that Canada can't deal with because their state is weak. And so this really is, those that are working in counterintelligence, it is a new emerging, I'll say, threat, which is fairly daunting. And India is obviously part of that, but part of the reason India is part of that is what they did in Canada, engaging criminals, is what they do in other parts of the world, as you know. That's what they do when they go into Pakistan. In many cases, they do reach out and get criminals for some very odious activity. So in a way, they're being trendy, but in another way, and this is something I have a hard time figuring out, India's done a serious miscalculation. I don't think they thought they'd get caught, which is kind of revealing. And I think they thought if they got caught, it's Canada. Who cares? They've got the most important relationship that matters, which is the United States. And so they may have figured that their importance to the United States is a check of China and all that, Indo-Pacific stuff you hear about, that will back them up. And the Canadians, it's cold up there. They play hockey. They say, hey, we'll manage the Canadian side of it. But they made a bigger mistake because the alliances Canada's a part of, the Five Eyes Alliance, NATO and other things, actually is a little stronger, I think, than what India thought their relationship was with the United States.
So Dan, you make an interesting point, right? But when we focus on the criminal, viewing of criminal, I call it like focusing on a very lower level of that's the tactical level, right?
Yeah.
The fact is that anybody can do. I can go and hire a criminal. Like, it's no big deal. Like, the Indian agency is hiring a criminal here. The fact is, the concerning to me, and I'm just like how you look at it. The concerning fact is not that. The concerning fact is they are able to control the reaction of United States and Canada to that act, because that is an influence. We have this whole army of United States spread out across God knows how many bases. But probably we don't have this level of influence in another major country to go ahead and murder and then be able to control the reaction of the civil society. And that brings me to the information warfare and the propaganda war that the Indian state indulges in. And we see that all the time.
Yeah.
And like you were kind of hinting at that, they viciously then started sending this propaganda. Oh, Trudeau is a druggie.
Yeah.
And many people, and they knew that there are divisions of left and right within Canadian society that can be exploited to sell that propaganda.
Yeah.
And now they are also co-opting. I am a libertarian, so I kind of feel disappointed. The xenophobic element within the right.
Yes.
Both in US and Canada. And they're actively doing it. You can see them use all measures. The nationalistic element of diaspora that they have here, even that has been converted somewhat to a tool. So So, given that, right, how big of a concern is that for the security establishment?
Yeah, that's a really good insight. They know, for example, the prime minister is very unpopular. They knew that. They've been, they do actually, I guess, provide some political reporting back to Delhi. So they knew there were these fissures in Canadian society, in politics, that they could take advantage of in this. So that the prime minister, when he did stand up in the House to make the announcement, there a lot of the people that weren't critical of India in many ways, it's just because they didn't like the prime minister.
Correct.
And at the same time, with that understanding of Canadian society and politics, they put in the propaganda and the disinformation. So, for example, it wasn't long after Mr. Najjar was killed, we heard these stories about a hand grenade thrown at the Canadian embassy, that there were 6 protesting outside the embassy. I know because one of the reporters at the Globe and Mail called me, and he was writing on it that basically there's no. I mean, I live in Ottawa. Do you think if there was an incident with a live hand grenade in the city of Ottawa, we wouldn't hear about it? The city would be shut down.
Yeah.
Okay, a hand grenade. But what happened is the NIA in India pumped that information into their media. Then it's picked up by Canadian mainstream media. And then you get Canadians who, like you say, far right, whatever you want, are going to believe that. And so it's a very skilled laying the groundwork with the disinformation, with the propaganda. And as you know, with disinformation propaganda, usually, it's designed for a particular audience, and to sort of, I guess, continue with these criminal activities. Again, you got to shake your head.
Yeah, and this is where I will probably Amandeep might have some insight, and then like there is definitely use of media to co-opt the xenophobic element within our society. And I think the goal is to create a racial backlash, and then you or Trudeau will have no 2 legs to talk to India and hold them accountable for anything like that.
Yeah.
So that's fine. But there is this, why are they so successful in this? Is not just their ability. It seems there is this allure, somewhere this allure between the remnants of whatever is left of, racism is in every society. We have here the remnants of that, and within the ideology that is emanating from the Hindutva element. And Amandeep, do you have any take on it? Because if you go back to history as well, we had this huge affinity between the Indian Hindutva, RSS, and Hitler, Nazis, and fascists.
Yeah.
And there is this, and I'm told General Himmler, who used to actually carry Gita in his pocket and used to kind of read it and use it to justify the violence against the Jews. So, where is this? Is there some element of truth to that in your research?
Yeah.
It's a burgeoning area of research and studies of genocide and also just violence. Hindutva is the new name for what we have known as Brahmanism, and it's a much larger, much older tradition. And it could be argued that they're the first people, the first philosophy in the history of mankind to propagate racial superiority based on hereditary background. So it's the oldest racial supremacist idea. It's also extremely resilient. It's not just an idea. It's not just in the scriptures. It's not just in the institutions. It's in the literal cartography of the South Asian continent. Every Hindu village that you attend has a clear line between the upper caste, or those that are considered human, and the subhumans, the lower caste untouchables. And 6 fall into the category of this non-Hindu subhuman other. So do Muslims as Malaysias, these demons. And Buddhists and Jains were also in this category, but they were, as they say, dealt with, and they were ran off and made extinct from India. So it's one of the oldest, most mature, accomplished traditions of racial Aryan supremacy. So there's definitely resonance with every recent tradition, every recent white supremacist movement that's come up in the West. Himmler had a leather-bound copy of Gita that he always kept, and he used in his lectures to make his soldiers detach from the violence that they're doing. That this is not
Right.
the ideal form is somewhere else. This is, they're the victim is falling on your knife. You're not stabbing anyone. So
Yeah.
that sort of extraction is only possible through this very peculiar interpretation, of religion, and they're very accomplished at this. And if you look at, the every major incident of like spectacular white supremacist violence, if you see Christchurch or the guy in Oslo, Norway, a few years ago,
Right.
the guy in Michigan who attacked the Sikh temple. Ironically, they're writing their manifestos and they cite the same scriptures, they cite the same organizations, the caste, traditions and institutions, and the way Hindutva has managed to deal with the problem of the racial other. So there's deep resonance and there's deep support and inspiration that these far right extremists find in Brahmanical Hinduism. So it's not some problem over there, right? I feel like
Right.
that's something that we need to emphasize, that this connects with the here and now,
Mhm.
and the right wing forces that are willing to discard liberal democracy itself for the
Yeah.
sake of racial unity. And I feel like that the gravity of that has not been reckoned with by global civil society, the left or the right.
Yeah.
The left kind of just shoved it under the rug, and they love their yogas and chai tea
Mhm.
lattes and the
Yeah.
brand that India is selling, and nobody's really called that out. That, hey, this is one of the most supreme, accomplished forms of fascism the world has seen.
Yeah.
Anyway, I would love to
Um,
hear your supplement to that if there is.
Dan, you have any reaction to that? I'll ask you a question.
Oh, well, yeah. I know with when the diplomats were being kicked out, and one of the columnists who had a fair bit of contact with Mr. Verma, he was the High Commissioner. One of the things he said was, since his arrival, he was obsessed with Sikhs. He was totally obsessed. Those are the words he used. And this is the High Commissioner of a G20 country. Okay. And so the only way I can sort of make sense of that is a lot of what you're saying is that there has to be an ideological push behind it. I dealt with Chinese intelligence and I dealt with Soviet intelligence, like I said, for a few years, and some other services. And in many cases, there is a doctrinaire set of beliefs that fuels them, their work. And sources have to report information that fits a particular party line, literally speaking. So there's an ideology there, and so that may be what we're seeing with, let's say, the Raw and some others, is a conformity to beliefs. I don't think they were just prostituted out to carry out some political leader's desire, like Modi just wants you to go do this. There has to be something stronger. If you put yourself in their position, put yourself in a consulate, let's say in the United States, and you get some direction from New Delhi to carry out certain things, you're not going to think this is this rogue. You're going to think this is the official position, and it has to be a position that makes sense to you, and that is consistent with where your country is going, and maybe those beliefs, if you have those deep, sincere beliefs, to do that. Because to do these types of things, for these Indian officials to do these types of activities in Canada, they're not doing it because they're paid. There has to be something a little more to that.
Yeah, on that, Dan, we have seen like India has, we feel like as a Sikh diaspora, that India is, always trying to defame and degrade and dehumanize the Sikh
Yeah.
diaspora. In your professional experience, has that been the case? Has that been your observation as well? And if yes, what are the reasons underlying their behavior that you can think of?
What what my experience I could take away from it, and what I can actually talk about, there are certain limitations, is that there was consistently for many years an effort to denigrate the Sikh population, that they're all terrorists. And that's why the Canadian government, and particularly the intelligence services, after a while just got tired of listening to them, because they wouldn't provide useful intelligence, and to the RCMP they wouldn't provide evidence. And yet even myself, and I'm talking years ago, I still couldn't understand why they kept doing this, kept coming back, even though we would ignore it, because it didn't make a lot of sense. We talk about terrorism. I worked 13 years in counterterrorism. We're looking at ISIS, we're looking at Al Qaeda, the previous Mujahideen, which morphed into Al Qaeda. Those are serious areas we would talk about. But at any engagement with the Indian service, all they want to talk about was the Sikh population. Like, that's all it was. Not that they'd be effective in identifying any Al Qaeda cell in Canada, they wouldn't. But they want to talk about the Sikhs.
Yeah, they identified me. My picture was up on the TV as a terrorist because I had a picture with me. Just jokes aside. Then on that side, right? Let's now that we have the benefit of you here, because there's been a lot of this propaganda that, especially by Indian media, and maybe your insight can help throw more light on it, factual light on it. The Indian media have been claiming Nijjar was a terrorist, and that we have shared all type of evidence with the Canadian agencies, and he's a terrorist, and the Canadians have been harboring him in spite of him being a terrorist. So in your view, was Hardeep Singh Nijjar a terrorist, and why did Canada not extradite him?
Well, I mean, I have my doubts that he was a terrorist. I mean, here's the thing. After 9/11, within a year after 9/11, Canada passed the Anti-Terrorism Act. What it did was it made it a criminal offense. It was an amendment to the criminal code that any support to terrorism, okay? If I give $5, if I send $5, if I drive someone to the airport, if anything, I can go to prison, okay? And there's a lot. I worked, like I say, I ran the national program, we call it radicalized jihadis. And there were a number of radicalized Al Qaeda followers, ISIS followers that are in prison right now. So why did the RCMP not arrest these people and prosecute them, the prosecution service and the RCMP, like Canada did with these other terrorists? Why did they not? Why are they walking around? That's my question. The answer seems to be there was never any evidence, okay? Or at least evidence from a Canadian standpoint, and I'm sure it'll be the same in the United States. So that's probably the best analysis I can come up with. We have the tools, and Canada's been very lucky and effective in countering terrorism. We certainly haven't had what the Americans have experienced with 9/11 and all these other things. We've had a few plots. We had two people killed in 2014, one soldier guarding the cenotaph. And we've had a major attempt with the Millennial Bomber in 1999. His name was Rassam. But Canada has not had a problem with terrorism. But we also have the tools, legislation. Not only do you have CSIS in 2016 was given disruptive powers, which is a new mandate to do things that they fall between police evidence and a CSIS investigation. So you've got all these tools, all these legislations. You've got to ask, why are all these allegedly Sikh terrorists walking around?
Why do you think there is this obsession of, I think we touched a bit about that there is an ideological element there. The state's obsession with the Sikhs. Do you think there is something else as well outside this ideological bent? Do they have some genuine reason that you have seen? Oh yeah, this makes sense.
Well, I think part of it, Arjit, is we do know that a lot of what India's been doing is to feed the domestic audience, is to feed the election, the political for the BJP and for Modi. Mm-hmm. We know that I mean, you see it every time these things happen. You watch the Indian news, and they've got, the big lights and the flashing, and Khalistani terrorists killed, and everything like that. And so everything that's been going on and portraying Canada as weak and overrun by criminals and terrorists, and then the Indian state goes over to Canada and kills all these terrorists. That pays big dividends back in India. So a lot of what they've been doing, and a lot of the damage control they've been doing, when you look at Mr. Verma's interviews he gave in Ottawa, which were really, really bad, but it's designed for an Indian domestic audience that will see their leadership as protecting them from all this evil in a weak state like Canada, because Canada is referred to as Canada-stan, right? They're saying it's just like Pakistan.
And Trudeau is definitely Justinder Singh,
Yeah, and it's also appealing to, like you say, that far right,
correct,
ideology as well, or white supremacist ideology and anti-woke and all the other stuff. But a lot of it really is designed for Modi to show he's the strong man. And we see this in every repressive regime. They will go overseas and neutralize the threats. And because it pays big dividends at home.
Yeah.
With the majority.
Related to that, I want to bring Aman also, but before I bring Aman on that, Dan, what would you like to say to your fellow patriots, right, fellow Canadians, when they hear propaganda like, oh, Trudeau is doing this? Like, Indian government has all kind of propaganda, but one of their points is, oh, Trudeau is doing this for politics, for votes, these Khalistani quote-unquote votes. What's your take on that?
No, the problem is, it's a good question. The problem is in Canada right now, it's so politicized. It's so much partisanship. And so that's what's happens is people fall on the lines of whether they like Trudeau or not. And so, there's people that just giggled and laughed and thought it was hilarious when they read in Canadian papers that there was cocaine on his plane in India, because that's what the Indian media put out. And the Indian media knows where that's going to go. And so the problem is, and that's probably what kind of annoyed me and why I've been speaking out, is because a lot of Canadians were looking at it from a partisan standpoint. And my view has been, and the reason I've been doing this advocacy for the Sikh community, is Canadians have to stick together.
Yeah.
I mean, my background's Irish. I mean, there's no hope for me. Okay. But we all come from an immigrant background. Every Canadian does. And so we can't just throw a group under the bus because a foreign state says they're bad. Yeah. Or say we will stand up to this state, but we won't stand up to that foreign state. Yeah. Because everybody's Canadians. We're all Canadians.
Yeah, this is a great point, Dan. And you telling me you're Irish kind of now explains a lot to me why you have been so sensitive to. I think for some reason I have met all the Irish people. They have been, and but in that aspect, right? The people, your fellow patriots, Canadians, many of them unfortunately see this as a brown versus brown issue.
I know.
Sometimes buy into this propaganda.
Yeah.
That, hey, Trudeau imported this problem, and India kind of feels that hey, you guys imported it. Like the foreign minister of India saying you imported this problem, kind of blaming the victim in a way. And what do you have to tell those people? Like, many people buy that propaganda, and they link it with their anti-immigration stance.
I know.
If we didn't have these things, we wouldn't have these problems. Like, let's send them back.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is that the day we don't stick together and we allow a foreign state to tell us the way it's going is that's sort of the beginning of the end of our democracy. It really is. I mean, we have to stand up, whether you like the leader, whether you like the politician or not. They have to put the safety of Canadians first, and they can't do that for one group and not another group. And I think that's what people have to look at. But, I have a lot of confidence in the government. I have a lot of confidence in law enforcement, a lot of confidence, obviously, in intelligence. And I think we're going to prevail on it. But this doesn't help. This propaganda doesn't help, and this partisan way in Canada of looking at it, like it's a distraction for Trudeau. It's infantile.
Yeah. Aman, I know you were trying to kind of come into the previous point as well, and we kind of moved the topic a bit, but
No worries.
please add your view on, on this dimension.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on. I think, the real stakes need to be understood properly, right? This is not about a, a lack of decorum of political international relations protocol. That's not what's the problem here. India has already subverted this potential democracy that could have existed in the South Asian subcontinent. They've already created into a much more worse colonial police state than the one that existed prior to it. And they want to do that here. Their grievance with Canada is not that you are allowing Sikhs that you're allowing Sikhs to protest. Their grievance is, why are you not hunting them down like we did here?
Yeah.
What's the problem? These people are subhuman. They deserve to be slaughtered, and there should not even be a questioning of that. So that's really what they're going after. And I think your previous conversation connects deeply to this. Is that why? Why is a nation state, a developing nation state that's burgeoning as an economic power, putting everything on the line to do this sort of ritualistic violence?
Yeah.
Right? Because their engine, what drives them, right? What's their life force is this sort of a drive to dehumanize the other and to build their own society on top of it.
Yeah.
And they're not going to stop until they're not going to stop until they have this colonial empire that they want to extend from Mecca all the way down to Malaysia and call it the Khand Bharat. But inversely, it's connected to how hollow it is, that it never existed as a nation state. It didn't have a history of 1,000 years of civil institutions being built like in European nation states, climaxing into this modern nationhood. It's a fantasy. It's a racist, fascist fantasy that's built on the dehumanizations of the other. And that's what's the core, that's why they're so threatened and emotional and schizophrenic about an authentic resistance like that of the Sikhs in Punjab, is because empire doesn't hate anything more than the claim of a native sovereignty. It's not threatened by anything more than an organic nation or a state that existed prior. So I think that's a big part of it, that because it doesn't have that precedent of having an administration even in this region prior to the British, or having even a semblance of a administrative unit, let alone a political nation state, it feels extremely threatened by Sikh resistance, and because Sikhs had an actual state that was not a colonial construction. It had actual treaties with the neighbors. It had European partners in its international relations, and all of that is super threatening. I mean, every time they go to Tibet today, China throws in their face the treaties that they've had with the Sikh state. They said they're the last stakeholders that we talk to. You're not an acknowledged stakeholder here. Bring the Sikh rulers back.
Yeah, but
So I think they understand the material weight of the Sikh state.
yeah, I mean, on that point, right? The one I think the Dan kind of also hinted at, and you kind of picked up on it, is that what Indian state wants is that, hey, Canada, don't ask a question on Sikhs. Just see, they are terrorists. Just lock them up. What's the big deal?
Yeah,
It's
really.
hardly a couple of people. We are not saying all the Sikhs, just the Khalistanis.
Yeah.
Let's just abrogate charter for like few hundred people, and just treat them with a separate, different standard, right? And by that, they're basically questioning the foundation of the democracy here, but they don't understand that. And isn't that
I have
also
a question.
underlying? Isn't that also
Sorry.
underlying? I'll come back to you on that. Is I'm trying to bring the geopolitics into it. Like if you see like BRICS and how this China, Russia, India come together, they actually explicitly state that our USP is we don't ask you questions on human rights. We don't ask each other, hey, why are you murdering Uyghurs? Hey, Russians, why are you kind of going to take over Ukrainian? Then you don't even acknowledge their nationhood. And isn't there a bit of this element of where these authoritarian states are also, it's not just India, they are finding common ground. And as the American power kind of moderates or seems to be weakening globally, that these regimes or colonial empires are kind of finding common ground. And is there an element of geopolitics in it as well? And any one of you can take a stab at it. Both of you.
Yeah. Sorry. Was,
Go ahead, Dan.
was that a question? I did.
Yeah, that was a question. That was an observation. Is there an element of geopolitics in this idea? Like, are these authoritarian regimes
Yeah.
kind of like India is kind of setting a standard in a way
Yeah.
and kind of leading the charge, and also using this as an excuse to partner more and more with China and Russia, and
Yeah.
kind of training and coaching Canada and US that if you allow me to do this, then I will be in your camp.
Yeah. I think what India has is a lot of big power aspirations. And we've seen this in the past with some states, really nefarious states, where their aspirations exceed their capabilities. But they see themselves that way. They see themselves in the big boys club, in projecting power. And part of that also is through their intelligence agencies and their security intelligence agencies, and going outside their comfort zone and doing what they've been doing in Canada, what they tried to do in New York State. But at the same time, they have this built-in insecurity because they know that the state is loosely held together. You know, you look at the treatment of religious minorities in India, you look at the, dissenters and things like that. So there's like this inherent insecurity complex. At the same time, they want to be in the big leagues and, put satellites up and everything else and stuff like that and run it. And I think that's part of what we're seeing and playing here as well. There's the ideological side that you talked about earlier, but I think there's also these aspirations that they're not capable of realizing. And so part of it is also to show that they can go abroad and they can kill their enemies, real and imagined, whatever, and get away with it. But when you do things that are so immoral, as it's hard to get away with it because eventually the truth comes out, and that's what's been coming out. I'm surprised they never had a damage control plan. I'm surprised they never had a PR plan, how they would manage this. Instead, all we heard was, first of all, the Canadians won't give us evidence. Yeah. And the Canadians are lying. Well, it's all Justin Trudeau. It was almost like a child. But that shows how ill thought this was, and which is good in a way, and beyond their capabilities of managing it. You just have to shake your head.
Yeah. You were just pointing out this ambition of the Indian state to be the big player, right? But the reality, and maybe Aman, you can kind of put some thought, like India is one of the poorest regions in the whole world. Like it's the level of poverty is worse than sub-Saharan Africa. 90% of the people live at less than $2 a day. Now, given how impoverished that is, like the actions of the state are so disconnected from the reality. They're launching like we'll send a satellite to the moon, and then we will go and kind of most of the people are so poor, they're lining up on the borders and kind of doing days and days worth of dangerous journeys to just get into United States. And people in the hinterland of India, where I have actually seen the poverty of India, they eat grass. That's the condition. But then you have this state which sees itself as an equivalent of United States, or even maybe superior morally to a certain extent. So what is this going on here? And then it is a democracy on paper. Like what do we have actually here?
Yeah, no, I think the word fantasy is very relevant and productive here. We're dealing with a collective fantasy, right, of a nationhood, of not just a nationhood, not any nationhood, a nationhood that goes back before recorded history, 6,000 years back, supposedly, that's supposed to have this continuity and this complete holistic society that's not just there, but it's better than anything else that's ever existed. And they work off of these fantastical constructions about their own past, but also of how demonic the other is, how bad and how deplorable and how subhuman and how easy to dehumanize the non-Hindu others are. And this is not a political problem. It's a problem of a collective psychic self-understanding. They build themselves as that which is above the lower caste, the subhumans. So I think this is a problem that has yet to be reckoned with properly at the level of the global civil society, because there is no other fascism that's more accomplished, more resilient, and more ancient than the one that's at the heart of the Indian state. And until that's head on taken on as a challenge, as a problem, we're just dealing with the symptoms, and that's why we see these sort of ritualistic, spectacular instances of violence that baffle folks that deal with regular international relations. And so that's the kind of dilemma that we're facing. That on one hand we have to mourn our suffering, we have to show the extent of the violence that's happened,
Mhm.
and at the same time there's no visibility to that suffering. So we also have to invent the language that the entire world can listen to. They could use this language or this lens to look at the problem, because nobody has really dealt with it until now, for various reasons, academically, intellectually, geopolitically, as we can obviously see. It's convenient to have India as an entity, for the West.
Yeah.
But it needs to be challenged, because what's at stake is, the future of, because there's no longer a thing over there. It's going to fuel the far right here. It's going to fuel and manipulate the system, the so-called liberal systems and the Democrats, and the entire political spectrum is at stake. And nobody's really taking it seriously enough. I feel like that's one of the key problems.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good one. While we keep going, I also want to kind of ask people who are listening on the Twitter space. We'll
I
start
do
with
have a question that I'd put forward. I think that's kind of everybody's thinking about this now that there's a Globe and Mail's report that recently came out that actually named Modi as one of the. Not only did he know about it, but he signed off on it. That was
Yeah.
an insinuation. So how does that, what does that do to the situation? And also, on the other hand, Trump, things have been muddied. The entire conversation is taking a different tone now. There's lots of Hindu nationalists that are in his cabinet. So how does that complicate the situation, and what are we looking at moving forward?
Well, I know with the Globe and Mail, I mean, it came out that the leadership, Modi, and a number of others were in the loop on it. And then later there was some backtracking, I think, from the government that there was no evidence. But you have to remember, again, it comes down to language. Often people are, I know when I heard the word evidence, I'm thinking court evidence that's treated differently than intelligence, because intelligence is not as precise as and you can have intelligence that's right. You know that Germany is going to invade the Soviet Union on June 21st, but you don't have evidence on it. And so it doesn't surprise me that the leadership at the highest level would be privy. I don't think anyone would carry these acts out thinking it's just a rogue who's doing it. So that doesn't surprise it. As far as, I'm not a foreign policy person. I don't know how it's going to go with the Trump administration. I did get the impression with the Biden administration in the last few months that there was an effort by the American government to hold India to account on it, not just for what happened to Mr. Panu in New York, but what was happening in Canada. That both I think it was Mr. Blinken, there was the NSA, there was a number of them. And when you hear these things, what you don't hear is what goes on behind closed doors. You don't hear about the CIA and their relationship or back channels they may be doing. So I think the US government, despite a lot of little sniping in Canada about, oh, no, they're throwing Canada under the bus, I think they were holding the Indian government to account. And I think they still are to a certain degree. But I don't know how that's going to go after January 20th.
Yeah, that's, I think, up for the toss. We'll know once things kind of settle in. That's probably Mr. Even Trump doesn't know where that's going to
Oh,
go.
I'm sure. It's, yeah.
And in a way, that might actually end up very bad for the Indians, honestly. And depends,
He could go either way, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, with that, I also want to kind of ask people on the Twitter space if they want to ask questions. Please feel free to ask for speaker. I will allow only one speaker at a time to ask a question, and then you guys can just take more questions. So feel free to ask for speakers, and I'm now ready to take speakers.
We should ask if CSYA is available, Karam Singh, if you're there.
CSY, yep, they're here. CSY, go ahead.
Yeah, hello. Hey, Dan, thanks for coming on. And yeah, I just wanted to maybe talk about or ask a question about, you kind of alluded to this a little bit, but with Trump, and I think like the Canadians rely on the Americans, and this is just my reading of what's been happening, is that they rely on the Americans to sort of go to bat for them.
Yes.
And what's your outlook when it comes to this? Like you said, we don't know, which way, Trump can be very bombastic about things in the public and maybe have a different, the agencies are working in a different way in private. Sort of how do you see like the next couple of years with the American administration and sort of that cooperation? Is the cooperation among the intelligence community strong enough to withstand sort of, maybe hostile administrations, or, in terms of cooperation, how do you see that coming? How do you see that, happening for the next couple of years between the Americans and the Canadians?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I mean, I of the 14 agencies in the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance, I worked with about 5 or 6 of them, and I had some other in other capacities with about another 2 or 3 of them. And it's a very tight alliance. And I'll tell you, it does not matter who the president or the prime minister is. They are not politicized, and they will go on with their own business, which is collecting intelligence and disseminating intelligence to a certain degree. And I don't think, and I know some Canadians would disagree with me, I don't think with the new administration there's going to be any change in the cooperation with Canada and the American agencies, or any reduction of sharing or anything like that. So it's almost like a parallel world. They will no doubt be holding India to account in terms of any cooperation. And the U.S. has a lot of cooperative initiatives with India. There was a drone package, I think, that was going through Congress in January of earlier this year. Yes, India did get them, I believe, but we don't know what all the quid pro quos are there. And so I think then they've sort of fallen in status, most likely with American intelligence, that can actually be used for some leverage in terms of what Canada needs to get ahead here. I think it's exaggerated when we talk about India as a check on China. I mean, really, but people use that to say how the relationship is really important, and how Washington is going to go back to courting Modi and stuff like that. But in the day-to-day work of intelligence collection and exchanging, I think India is out, and I think the Canadian-American alliance will be as strong as it always has been.
Got it. CSYA, you have anything follow-up question to ask?
No, I think that's really important and refreshing, and quite a relief to hear that. I think that will continue. I do see that. Obviously, the Prime Minister Trudeau made those remarks And when we're following sort of the case in the States with Gurpatwan Singh Pannu, you see sort of the Americans are a little bit more tight-lipped about that. I think we had some very strong statements from the district attorney who was on the case, with the attorney general making some quotes, but at the same time, I don't think the administration is very loud about it either.
Yeah.
So do you think that this comes from, I think they're cautious, and I think right now the Americans have a lot going on in terms of, I think their credibility with human rights atrocities like in the Middle East and what's going on. Are they just not, as focused as this in sort of underscoring this as an issue, or is this just kind of your typical, at the end of the day, this is just another case in New York? Or are you surprised that the State Department hasn't been more aggressive about it, or maybe Biden himself hasn't said anything about it, or is that sort of standard, do you think?
Yeah, I think that's standard, and I think that's just the way it is with realpolitik, is everybody finds a way to move forward. And so with the United States, and it was very different in the United States, to be fair, they got advanced intelligence of what was going to happen in New York, and they were able to get all their undercover officers and surveillance out and everything and prevent it from happening. Canada was different. They didn't have any significant specific lead intelligence to go ahead. But I think the Americans are able to manage that issue and the issue with the Canadians in India, and at the same time move forward. And they do that with other states. I know there was a push a few years ago to have the IRGC delisted, talk about the Taliban being delisted so you can have humanitarian aid in Afghanistan. So I think American government, to a certain extent, the Canadian government, they know there's a need to be flexible and move forward. It's just in the Canadian case, we are kind of, I don't know, we're in a bad situation because we need Indian cooperation to progress further with prosecuting these people that did these things. Whereas the Americans don't have that issue. They're moving ahead on this guy Gupta and things like that, and it'll be business as usual with India.
Yeah. Now, coming to that case, right, Dan, where do you think that case is? Like you talk about, like ultimately there is a cooperation needed from the Indian side to get this, and they're never going to cooperate. Let's put it in that way, unless they're forced to cooperate. And what's next going to happen in your view with the case that is going on in Canada?
Yeah, what they could do is find someone to throw under the bus. They did that with the Americans. I forget the guy's name. I don't even think we know where he is now. But they'll find someone and say yes, and he's going to be punished or whatever. And we'll never hear from him again. But there has to be an admission that they did it, because they've been showing the evidence, not intelligence. They've been showing the evidence, and but they box themselves into a corner. That's the problem. When you start by denying and lying and playing games, your options narrow, and so there has to be a point where India sees it's in their best interest to resolve this, and the only way the Canadians are going to see it resolved is to get access to the people, probably in India, who are behind it. And I have my doubts it's going to happen. I doubt the RCM, the Mounties, are going to get visas and go to Delhi, but Canada has to try, and Canada has to push it and not let it go, because these are Canadians. On that. Anyway, that's my speech.
Yeah. Absolutely. We also have Angad Singh on the speaker. Angad, thanks for joining. Please go ahead. If you have a question or any observation, go ahead and add. Angad, can you hear me? Angad Singh is a Emmy award-winning documentary producer, blacklisted by India, is what his profile says, which I think is a good thing, and which today is becoming a badge of honor. If India blacklists you, obviously you must be doing something correct.
Yeah, it is.
And if you are being invited to India, probably that should raise Dan's antenna. Who is getting?
No, no, not no. I'm not. I don't have a fan club there. Trust me. I know.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's a good way, to just for your intelligence counterparts. Just have to see who's getting invited, who's getting rejected.
Yeah, China, India. No,
Yeah.
not me.
Yeah, it's kind of it seems while we have Angad waiting is I seems it's like for India. I come from India. I was in the Indian Defense Forces, and I've kind of understood the system. I've kind of been born and brought up in that society. It seems that the role model for India is China in terms of how they want to govern, right? And their values kind of match with China. Now we are seeing practically they are changing their system on the Chinese system. When I say that, I mean the way they're controlling this thing called UPI, how they control every single penny who is paying what, and so it seems as if they have this superficial relationship with West, but in reality they're aligning a lot with China on every single thing that matters. And how does that kind of play out in the long run is a big question. And I know that geopolitics is my big interest. It's not an interest, I'm forced to think like that. Because when I look at these matters, I'm looking at in these bigger things which are going on. And when I go to China, I'm surprised how much control the state has there because they can monitor every single thing I'm doing. And India is kind of very near to that. And now, does that, Dan, now we are in speculative territory. But do you think that this thing will keep worsening, or do you think? I think you said you hope things will get better between India and Canada. But if the geopolitically things are worsening, this could actually keep going on.
It could, but I know. I mean, historically, India is always like I have a bit of a background there, as you know, and has always been preoccupied with China. Like my take on Pakistan is India has always been dismissive of Pakistan. Pakistan is preoccupied with India, but India has always been kind of like, yeah, to a certain degree. But it's China that's always been a greater concern. And that's why, for example, the RAW, the Research and Analysis Wing of India was created. It was because of intelligence failures with respect to China. And it's always been the strategic threat for India. And I don't think that's going to change despite this current love-in we may be seeing, and, Putin as well, and India. Again, I'm not a foreign policy guy, but I think India's always kind of gone it alone and pretended to invest a lot in these other relationships and alliances like the U.S. So they'll get what they want for the short term, but I don't think. I think in the long term they just go their own route.
Yeah, I hope so, and that is
We
my.
have just believe we have just Veer Singh and also Angad Singh.
Yeah, I've been asking Angad. Angad, can you hear us? Or Jasveer is here. Okay, Jasveer or Angad. Okay, Angad can speak now. Angad, go ahead. Aman Paji, can you hear Angad speaking? Okay, I can't hear him as well. It could just be that I'm going to take Angad's speaker and then add him back as a speaker. Okay. While we are at Jasveer, can you hear us? Can somebody give a thumbs up if they can hear me on the Twitter? Okay, Jasveer can hear me. CSY, okay. Jasveer, go ahead and add something to the topic. Welcome to the space. And I don't know whether you have met Dan earlier. Dan Jasveer works for SICK PA. I'm not sure if you met him, but he is probably one of the most eloquent narrators of the situation I have met.
Kind of you.
Yeah, I'm always impressed by the way he puts out the situation. Just will go ahead and add something or ask Dan a question.
Thank you.
No problem. Yeah, thank you so much. And I've spoken to Dan previously only via your other space, actually, but I know that our brothers at places like World Sikh Organization. I've been well versed with him. So he's had good connection with the Sikh community. So again, thank you for being here, Dan, and thank you and the other Sangat for hosting him. You guys can hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you.
Yeah, okay. And just wanted to add, if as somebody might have heard me, I was just in the Indian nationalist space about 10 minutes ago, you might have not thought I was so eloquent or articulate, but the different energies bring out different sides of you. Anyway, getting to the point. Question for Dan, and also I'd like you guys to jump in as well. We are experiencing a bit of a peak, a increase, if you will, of the Indian nationalist targeting of the Sikh community. What do we think provoked this this uptake in targeting of the community? Is it something like the farmers' protests? Is it on-the-ground activities? Dan, in your view, what have you seen like over the years and the way India acts towards groups like the Sikh diaspora, and also the rest of you guys, if you would like to tune in? What do you think has kind of facilitated this peak in them targeting the community?
Thanks for the question. I don't really have any insight on that, to be frank with you. I mean, we always, when I was working in the area, I mean, we just, I don't say we even responded to it. We just dealt with Indian foreign interference. That seemed to just be consistent. And then again, there was always those requests to look at someone or accusations someone was a terrorist. What was going on in India that provoked that? I really don't know. It was just, again, there was always a preoccupation with the Sikh population in Canada. Didn't seem to be anything to provoke it from that I could really read into. But again, maybe I just don't have that background.
I have a theory. Go ahead, Aman.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a theory, Dan, and you don't have to confirm or deny it, but up to you. This is all speculation, but my guess is that the foreign interference of India in Canada was always there. Maybe not to the extent that it will.
Yeah.
And when you don't stop somebody from doing it, the only thing it can happen is only going to increase, because why will they decrease?
Yep.
So it has been going up steadily, reaching a kind of a point where they felt confident enough when Trudeau visited India in 2017. I had never seen a dignitary coming from a Western country being insulted and denigrated in the way Trudeau and his entire cabinet was. And I think something happened there. And that probably was, I won't call it that triggered it, but I would say maybe that was a tipping point of where the situation was headed.
I think that's great insight. Now that I think of it, you never see that kind of hostility between nations at such a surface level anyway, at such a very kind of presentational level, where you've got taking place through the media, through formal greetings, what Captain Amarinda famously said around those times as well. So excellent. And that's a great point.
Yeah.
And I think just to add a little bit more color to it at a macro level, historically, Sikhs have been the favorite target of any Indian regime since 47, because not only do they serve the same purpose of an enemy within that's been quelled by a strong leader, crushed by a strong leader, but there also isn't as much of a high of a price to pay. You don't have to face the entire global civil society when you're doing violence to 200 million Muslims or 300 million Dalits. You don't have that type of a worry when you're dealing with a much smaller population of Sikhs. So I think that's one side of it. So they have already been sort of demonized for their targeting of Muslims, and so Sikhs were supposed to be an easy win. You do these strikes. It's a global thing. It's Avtar Singh Khanda in UK, healthy guy who passes away in 4 days of cancer.
Right.
A number of hits in Pakistan, and this has been verified by U.S. intelligence officials speaking about this. How Indian agencies hire Taliban outfits to do their work in Pakistan, and also in Canada and U.S. And it's been steadily brewing for a while. This is not the first time. So that's one side of it. But I think it's also that the fight is not for Punjab, between the Sikhs in India. The fight is for India itself. If Punjab goes, India is going to have a hard time staying connected. So I think it's much more existential for them, and they take Sikhs extremely seriously because it's not a political dissident that they're fighting. They're fighting the memory of an actual nation state that existed here organically
Right.
before the colonial advent, right? And so they're very much threatened by it, and it's always front and center. I think it's much more seriously taken than the Sikhs take India most of the time.
Yeah, that's a very good point. But to Jasveer's question, to bring it kind of picking up on that uptake, right? Then how do you see this? How seriously, how concerned are you with Poliver not taking the security briefing?
Oh, it's hard to get your head around it. I mean, the other leaders of the other parties have because of these allegations, and he's made a decision not to, feeling that would allow him not to be critical of the government and that. But it's I think the decision is costing him a bit. The implication is that the other country was India, and the interference was in the Conservative Party, just as China with the Liberal Party. And his refusing to do that means that he can't vet his party. He can't decide this person should not be in the caucus. This person who, when he becomes prime minister, could be in a sensitive cabinet position.
Yep.
He needs to know. And in many cases, this information is not going to be apocalyptic. It's not espionage. Some of them it may be poor judgment. Some of them it may have been they did some favors for a foreign state. But a lot of Canadians do not understand why he's so stubborn on this and not getting a clearance. I've spoken publicly on this. A lot of people have. It just doesn't make any sense if you want to be prime minister.
In your guess, does it go beyond uh, vote consideration? I know there's a big nationalistic Indian vote bank here, or does it go beyond that? Something I know it's all speculation, but like I'm baffled. Like this is supposed to be a bipartisan issue,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Yeah. No, you see, again, it goes back to the genesis of the inquiry. The inquiry was who knew what, where, and why about China interference giving a disadvantage to the Conservatives. That's why it was there. And so everybody wanted the inquiry because it was making the Liberal Party, the Liberal government look bad. When India emerged as a major player in foreign interference, where they were interfering to give the Conservatives an edge, that's where people had a problem. And that's where, in this case, the leader of the opposition doesn't want to be read in. He doesn't want to get a clearance, and he doesn't want to do it. And what it's doing is it's feeding conspiracy theories, half of which are probably not true. But he needs to get the clearance. He probably won't because he's already drawn that line in the sand. But it's not good. It's not good for the Conservatives, at least on this. I mean, they'll do okay. They'll probably be forming the next government. But there's always going to be that little stigma of a security issue. Why did you not get a clearance?
I think it is such a grave lack of political calculation, honestly. But I'm not a Canadian, but just an outsider. If I was Poliver, I would have been the first one taking a briefing and saying, "Oh, this is about Canada.
Absolutely.
We need to stand together." That's how the Conservatives stand, and he would have won this election without any issue and taken care of his patriotic duty. I think he's kind of, I don't know, this lack of some wrong advice being given to him, or unless his name is there, which kind of
There is a precedent for it, I guess, right? There is a historical precedent for this, and that's kind of how they've been dealing with Sikh suffering, right? Just kind of shove it under the rug and focus on the corporate interest. We have M. Singh also. He's a frequent visitor of these spaces. M. Singh, can you hear us?
Yeah, hey. Great space, and thanks for taking questions, Dan. So, I mean, the Sikh community has been like very vindicated by news that someone like in the likes of Burma and other consular diplomats were expelled for the activities they've engaged in. But I'm wondering, like, as far as the body of clandestine and the world of espionage that India is engaged in Canada historically, is there anything more that we can expect to come forward? And a second question, maybe to pair with that, is do you see any indication for the Canadian government to look into the role of the Indian government and transnational repression as it pertains to Air India again? Or because personally, I see like there's a case building for that, but I'd love your insights on that.
Yeah, I'll answer the second question first. No, I don't think there'll ever be any revisit to the Air India bombing, and I'll just leave it at that. The sorry, I've just skipped here the first part of your question because I think the worst we would possibly see from the Indian government is what we've seen and what we've heard. Espionage has never been much. Most of what they've been doing is foreign interference, and now we've got these egregious crimes and murders, and I can't imagine anything more than that. I think Canadian intelligence has been very good on them. I think they've been following it for a long time, short of knowing about the killings, unfortunately. But I think this is it. I don't think there's going to be any more skeletons in closets. I don't think we're going to find out, some politician was a paid agent and influenced policy or anything like that. And I also don't think anything will ever exceed what they've done. This is, as Amandeep said, we don't even have a category yet for this.
Okay. Just a follow up to that. I've personally always observed a disconnect. I've thought that intelligence knows more than has been made public, but government officials and their outlook and engagement with India, like it's never really translated right into keeping India at an arm's length kind of distance. It's always more been India's a sister democracy on the other side of the world. Yeah. Does that change going into the future, irrespective of which administration is in government?
Yeah, I mean it's ultimately a political decision. The intelligence services, they have no say in this, and you're right. There is always knowing more. I mean, if we were in the business, we don't always want an adversarial state to know what we know, right? That's the gold dust of intelligence, is you collect the intentions, activities of a hostile state, but you don't let them know that you know. And so there'll always be intelligence that's not going to be revealed for a variety of reasons, and of course to be able to continue to collect intelligence. But I think the second part of your question is it's always going to remain a political decision, and I don't think Ottawa right now is probably even contemplating the future, where they're going to go with the Indian relationship. Of course, they're seized right now with tariff issues with a friend and ally. But I think what we're going to see is the criminal investigation that the RCMP has, that will continue, that will persevere. But where Canada's relationship ends up with India down the road, I don't know. But I think it'll take a long time before it gets back on the board. We got 40 diplomats that were kicked out of Delhi. We have people that need visas. We need travel and business in that. But I don't want Canada to move ahead on that until we hold these people accountable for what they did. That's my opinion.
But the Indians were celebrating. They were saying it is a great thing because the consulate, Canadian consulate in Chandigarh got shut down.
Yes.
So the Sikhs won't be able to. Like, it was the most horrendous thing I could hear from, like they're celebrating that their own citizens are going to undergo difficulties.
Yeah, I know. That's right.
Do you think, Dan, in your experience, India treats the Sikhs as, especially even in living in India, as equal citizens to their majority?
No. I mean, we know that. I mean, they repression of religious minorities. I mean, we all know about, the Muslim population, the Oyota Mosque. It's all there. And there is a religious dimension to this. You can't rule that out. And it's historic. And as you articulated, Amandeep, you mentioned that, Punjab before partition and the history I don't know that well, but I think sadly that's going to always be there.
Is this Dan incident and the spat going to trigger more interest and study into India, the Indian state, its foundation among intelligence agencies, even in universities like the what you are doing?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, it's always there. I mean, I have, like I say, I have a bit of a background on South Asia, and so if you want to collect good intelligence, you need to understand the culture and the history. My history of background. Most of the books there are all history, and you need to know the history. I've worked many other areas besides South Asia, Russians and other areas, and you need to have a really understanding of the history and the culture and the nuance and everything like that in order to collect intelligence. It's useful to the government, and so you have to look at all sorts of emerging powers and rogue regimes.
Yeah, I know you have been acting ignorant deliberately, and you know a lot about history, in fact. But being a good intelligence professional, you've been kind of threading that very neatly. And yeah, Aman, but you don't have those restrictions. You can go ahead and talk about history or whatever you
Yeah, no, I'll add a couple of comments, but I think Angad, if you're available, if you have the ability to talk this time around.
I know we are also we're mindful of the time. We are almost 1 hour 45 minutes in. So Dan, there's no whenever you want to drop off, let us know. We are this we continue these spaces all the time. But
Yeah, no, I think I will. I will. I just want to say. I just want to say one thing. One, I'm very flattered you asked me on this, Amity, but sorry, you asked me on this webinar. But I just want to say, I can't imagine being a Sikh how much anxiety people must feel right now. I know, particularly in Canada. Obviously, I know a lot in the community in Canada. I know some in the Americas as well. But I can't imagine how it feels with what you've heard and what you've experienced and what you've experienced for years and what people haven't listened to you and people haven't been hearing you, or they think it's just an India problem and they wish it would go away. But I just want to let you know there are people that empathize with that and see it the way I do, which in Canada means we're all Canadians. We all stick together. It's the same with the United States. You're all Americans. You should stick together, and I think you do. But I just want to say, in a way, I just feel very sad about what's happened and what they've done to the community. And I very much hope, and I'm quite confident that things will get better.
Off the back of those comments, could I just quickly ask you, do you have any observations? Because the most disconcerting thing to myself that I feel my family is the amount of disinformation about our community that's propagated through either foreign interference or disinformation campaign or things in the media, right? That the Indian government manages to get through to Canadian social media platforms and the like.
Yeah.
Like, is there any advice for our community or some observation you have with respect to that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't have a background as far as the disinformation piece and that. I would say, deal with your representative. You're, I mean, I think you're Canadian, are you?
Well, I have family in Canada.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I thought maybe you were in Canada, but I think it's just, obviously the same in the States. You've got Congress, you've got senators. They have to represent you. I mean, I'd say the same thing in Canada. We've got members of parliament, we've got provincial. They have to represent the community. And you don't feel safe. You see garbage written. That's the best way to push back. Just use those institutions.
Yeah.
They're resilient institutions. That's why we had an inquiry into our democratic processes. And to me, that's the best defense is get them to represent you, when this crap comes out.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much.
I would love just to ask one more question, if that's all right.
go ahead.
Dan, is there anything specific about Canada which makes the Indian infiltration either easier or either more important to them? Is it just perhaps the size of the Sikh diaspora here? Is there anything specific to do with maybe lapses in Canadian intelligence or anything like that? Is there anything you can expand on there?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I know that they play a lot on the Air India bombing, which was a horrible tragedy. And and in the past there was a boat that arrived, I think 1918, 1917, with a lot of Sikhs on it. And so there's also a history with racism. And so, there's enough reality that allows them to then build on that as well. And, depict the Canadian government as racist and their intelligence agencies as inept. But other than that, I think it's just because it's been a major immigration point for Sikhs. And I think in many ways what the Indian government fears, it's not a Khalistan. I think what they don't want is a Sikh identity outside of India that is strong. And if you look in Canada, we've had Sikhs in senior cabinet positions, federally, provincially, Minister of Defense, major representative of a major political party right now, business, and they've been very successful. And I think that bugs them. Simply because Canada has the largest diaspora. If the largest diaspora is the United States, you'd probably have this problem.
Yeah, that takes me to that proverbial mistake. Trudeau made this comment in a good. He thought he will be welcomed for this comment when he joked that, Mr. Modi, I have more Sikhs in my cabinet than you. He thought Modi will appreciate it.
No.
Thinking,
Right.
okay, they're going to appreciate that our people are welcome. But he had no clue that India does not consider Sikhs as their people. They consider Sikhs as enemy. And not just Khalistani, the Sikhs in general. Okay. So,
Yeah. He should have read his intelligence briefs.
oh yeah, you guys did brief. Okay.
Anyway, folks, I'm going to head out, but it's been a pleasure and an honor to speak to you. And anyway, I wish you all the best.
Thank you so much, Dan. Your comments and your insights are very timely, and they have a lot of weight. Like you mentioned, for Sikhs, it's been a schizophrenic experience last decades. So the violence happens, and then there's the erasure of the violence, and you can't talk about it. So you're not even allowed to mourn. So, by giving solidarity and your comments and insights, it's producing that space where Sikhs can actually talk about their suffering. So it's very productive, and we welcome you here shortly again. Thanks so much for your time. We'll continue these conversations.
All right.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah. So Dan has probably left us. We'll probably continue this space for a couple of more minutes, Aman Paji, unless you want to close. Up to you.
No, sure. We can keep going. I thought it was a good conversation for being more or less impromptu.
Okay.
If there's more input,
I would just like to expand on what you just said about us kind of like digesting exactly what happened and being allowed a bit of space to mourn, because that's something that actually hit me probably like a month or two ago. I was just driving and I was listening to a song, actually a hip hop song. I'm a fan of like hip hop music, and it was a song where the artists are kind of like mourning the deaths of people like Martin Luther King and so forth. And I was just like, wow, like that. It really hit me. This was deep Sidhu. Sidhu Moosewala, obviously, he's from a different space, more of an artist and an activist, but still. And then they're coming into Bhai Singh Khanda, Shahid by Hardeep Singh Nijjar, and it's been a crazy time. And so, yeah, please, I think that's important for Sangat to digest that. We do give yourself a bit of space to mourn and, move forward accordingly, obviously, Chaddi Kala always. But I think that's an important thing for us. So thanks for mentioning that.
Yeah, I just have one thing. Aman Paji, is it okay to end the live stream and we can continue the Twitter space? I just want to end the live stream, start packing up my bags. We can keep talking on the Twitter space, is still live. And just before we close, I never had 1,400 live viewers on live stream, okay? it's just phenomenal. The number of people who were watching on live stream. Um, yeah, never had so many people. Like, this is mind boggling.
Yeah, no, I think we'll continue this. I think it's worth the effort and the time. It does take some time, but I think having voices and people that are credible, that have real names and real job histories that they can cite, I think that's important. And yeah, like the last comment, I think the tragedy is that we don't even have the right to mourn, right? Like, you not only in justice and acknowledgement, those are dreams, but you don't even have the space to talk about your suffering. So I think this is super important, and I love everybody's input and feedback. How this went, and
Yeah, I mean, what comes to mind with that actually, Virji, as well, is that after Shahid Bhai Hardeep Singh Nijjar passed, you were seeing articles like about his so-called legacy being pushed by groups like Global News, and I'll never forgive the journalist Stuart Bell. Such a disgusting piece talking about his so-called legacy. While meanwhile, people from actual Surrey, there were Muslim families, there were people of the indigenous community that were talking about this was a great community leader that tried to bring people together. But on the other side, you had mainstream media depicting his legacy and just basically regurgitating the Indian nationalist kind of framework of things. And yeah, I mean, that's just something I think it helps us kind of see exactly where we are with this issue when we process these types of things. Like, we don't even get space to mourn. So our shaheeds, it's a crazy time we're going through. Sorry, I feel quite passionate about that, so just had to jump in there.
no, absolutely. I think that's half of the battle. Who gets the sort of collective flow of empathy? Who is allowed to talk about suffering, right? Whose suffering is even suffering? It seems like, until very recently, the entirety of like Sikh suffering in the last 3 decades is relegated to some sort of a political conflict or ethnic conflict over there, and it doesn't really meet the criteria of what you call social justice, right? What sort of universally recognized types of suffering, right? And I think that's one of the key problems that we still have, is that the biggest leverage that the Indians have is to reduce this to uh, two brown groups fighting, majority minority fighting, or a state and a minority fighting, dissident fighting, and erasing like the human dimension of the suffering and making it very commonsensical, right? And you can see this working out exactly on Twitter. Protests in front of a Hindu temple. I think the entire Canadian Parliament was on Twitter within the next 2 hours, right? And then the same day, you have thousands of people in the streets encircling Sikh places of worship, attacking Sikh families, and it's more or less silent, right? There's no response. And so those mechanisms, right? Like, who is able to invoke sympathy and outrage, like, selectively? I think that's what we need to kind of focus on, and keep opening up these spaces and kind of laying bare, what's really going on underneath the paper, what's on paper. But yeah, if you guys want to go on to the audio space, we can do that, or
Yeah,
end it either
we
way.
can continue here. I'm going to move that. Yeah, let me. Yeah, we can probably close the live stream. I think that's ideal, because then we can keep talking on the live stream, the Twitter space. I'm going to end the live stream, and if people on live stream want to join us on the Twitter space will be live for quite some more time. To find the Twitter space, you can find it on my timeline. Else you can go to, it's being run from Amandeep Paji's Twitter account. And Paji, can you tell me your whatever your
The
alias is,
handle,
alias Twitter handle?
yeah, Sarkare Khalsa. So just, I'll send it to you. I'll pin it to the profile as well.
Yeah,
I think Coin has her hand raised.
if you can just respond in this chat, and we can take Coin's question, and then we'll close the live stream and we'll keep the Twitter. Coin, go ahead.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki
Waheguru Ji
Fateh.
Ki Fateh.
Oh, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
That was such an excellent space, and thank you so much for organising it with Dan Stanton. Yeah, there was a lot to unpack as an audience. There was a lot of really insightful, measured comments made. He definitely has an amazing grip on what's happening, and to sort of listen to someone with such a huge history and experience in the realm of intelligence is it's a privilege, and more so to hear from his words that he stands by the Sikh community, because it is the most Canadian thing to do, to support your own, and I think that's something that shouldn't be it shouldn't be taken lightly, and it should give a big amount of support. Like, we may not have the numbers in terms of your huge support, but we've got really good quality support, people who have introspect and understanding of what the situation is. And I think the framing of the question, transnational terror, future of liberal democracy and Hindutva, is excellent, because Canada is gripped by foreign interference, and the Indian interference is laced with Hindutva, which is Hindu fascism. And that's what we're seeing on Canadian soil.
Yeah, I just want to add to that.
To hear someone like Dan Stanton say that, I'll just say one more thing, and I'll just stop. Yeah, for him to say that they don't want Sikh identity outside India was quite
massive. That was
really
massive.
Really,
that was a really important statement. I hope everyone digests that. This is really beyond just like a geopolitical thing for the Indian state. It's something that's coming to the very heart. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Yeah, massive thing.
I got goosebumps. He said it because this is something that we've all, a short period or whatever we've been observing things. It is such a profound statement, and for him to say that he said so many gems that this whole space needs to be analysed, and the recordings need to be made, because it is, if someone can do a write-up as well, an article on this, I'll just feel, I'm looking at you, if you can, it'll just be so amazing.
We have the headline there, exactly what you just said, that the targeting is not the targeting of Khalistan, is they don't want us to have a Sikh identity outside of India. So massive. You got the headline there.
Yeah, I mean, there's been ongoing conversations between Dan and myself and others, and so he's actually very intuitive. Like, he understands the foundational dynamics, and there's limits to what he can say. But I think even what he hinted at is great. There's a reversion to, there's like a allergic reaction to any political subjectivity, right, outside of what they allow you to be. So I think that's great that he's brought that up. And I mean, ideally, if we have folks that can, help put this into more digestible formats, right, the video, that'd be great. Editing folks, video editing, and others. But let's move it on to the audio space, right, Harjeet Singh?
Yeah, Haji, let's move on the audio. I'm going to just close the live stream, and then we'll keep talking on the Twitter space.